This week, we're going to look at the role of narcissists and how they create the other. Let's get started. Now, welcome back to my channel, Being the Other. I'm Dr. Dwight Turner, and what we're going to do is look at narcissism, and in particular, how a narcissist actually informs and creates the other. Now, this is actually quite an important session, so I'm going to split this into 2 episodes. So this first episode looks at the role of the narcissist. The second one will look at the role of the echo position. And I'll talk a bit more about the echo position next time around, although I will mention it today just ever so briefly. But to start with, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the work of Martin Buber. Now, he wrote a wonderful book called I and Thou, which I recommend for yourselves to go and read. And in that book, he talks about there being 2 main types of relationship. An I and Thou relationship, hence the title of the book, which is one of mutuality, where I meet you where you are and you meet me where I am, and we start that dialogue from a position of equality, if you like. The second relationship, though, is the one I want to concentrate on today, which is the I-it relationship. And where he goes with this is, when I need to use someone or something, I'm not seeing them in their truer context. I'm seeing them as something that I need for myself. For example, I'm at home, I'm cold, I look to build a fire, I go out, I chop down a tree, I use the tree for my own benefit to actually make warmth for myself. That's not the tree's purpose. I create a purpose that suits me. That's just a very brief example of an I-it relationship. It denies the tree its natural relationship of one with the earth, or providing shade, of converting CO2 into oxygen. All these other things are less relevant for myself in that moment. It's more about what I need from that other. Now, his work posits that there is just one I position that would relate to both the thou and the it. But I would question this, and I have done in some of my writings, where I've actually said that actually, in order for me to change from that more relational position to one where I'm going to use you for my own benefit, I have to change. Something more self-serving has to come through. This is where the narcissism begins in this podcast, as I'm talking about it. Now, what I'm not going to do with this podcast today is talk about how narcissism forms. It's an enormous topic. There are many different types of narcissism that psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychotherapists have debated about for about 100 years. You can go back to Freud's work and even come up to date with my own sort of material on narcissism. What I would like to do, though, is to highlight one specific aspect which I think is hugely important here. The idea of projection. Now, what that actually means is, if I have a sense of self that is poorly formed, and I believe I am a certain way, shape, or form, then one way of avoiding growing up, which is something I talked about in previous sessions, is by actually creating an other in order for me to project aspects of myself that I don't want to acknowledge. For example, seeing certain groups as more aggressive or as more promiscuous than myself just denies me my own sexuality and aggression. It means I don't have to acknowledge those parts of myself, even if all around me they're playing out ad infinitum. These are the sorts of things that a narcissist will do in the creation of another. Now, even though we often project aspects of what we want onto another, be it a person or a thing, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't respect who they are and what they're actually all about. Because there is a cost to the other in this moment. For example, if I'm not seeing you as you are, and I'm not going to be able to acknowledge you as you happen to be, then you're invisible to me. Who you really are, the culture you're from, the gender, the sexuality and so on, it just disappears. Because I'm only seeing you as I need you to be. The second part to that, it can lead to you not actually having a real voice. You're not there to play a role in any way. You're there to just be. To hold who I want you to be by just being a blank screen. Now, this works great if you're a therapist, if you're a psychodynamic therapist in particular. We use this an awful lot with our clients, where we're actually taught to hold projections of our clients in order to then reflect back to them aspects of themselves that they need to own in some way, shape, or form. A narcissistic group, doesn't want to own those projections. What they actually need to do, or want to do, I should say, is actually have those projections remain exactly where they are ad infinitum. And they'll do this by actually forming a number of ways, using power over the other and so many other different ways to actually maintain that sense of superiority and control ultimately. But in order for this to happen, there is a huge cost upon the minority. Now, for example, when, like I mentioned, the policies of assimilation, when one is called to be like the majority, when one is called to fit in, that therefore means that the other has to suppress huge parts of who they are, their culture, their heritage, whatever else that there happens to be, in order to fit in with the majority. That's actually more or less impossible to do. You know, I remember a story, reading something out of The Guardian for a newspaper here in the UK, where back in the 80s, the Thatcher government was hugely surprised that after a series of riots that had happened across the country back in the 80s, that the African Caribbean community hadn't quite been assimilated as much as the government at the time had hoped. On reading that sort of article, I was actually immediately struck by the naivety of the time in expecting a group who had their own heritage and history to then give that up on movement to the UK. Like I've said in previous podcasts, the moment you engage with the other, everything has changed on both sides of the divide. That means if there's an element of narcissism on one side, that's immediately challenged by the presence and the actions of the other. This doesn't mean that the other doesn't try to fit in some way. Often it will do exactly that. It will do what is asked. For example, here in the UK, there's often a drive about having to learn English, having to fit in with and learn the English language, English way of life, and plenty of people who come to this country will do exactly that. They've often taken different routes as well, be it changing their name so their names sound less foreign, whatever that means, to whitening of one's skin so you don't look so different, so other, to actually taking on more male or British mannerisms. I once had a friend whose father came from the Caribbean, who was raised on a diet of smoky London, Savile Row suits, etc. And when he came to this country, one of the first things he did was to actually save enough money to go down to Savile Row to go and buy himself a suit. Now, I don't know many people from back then or from since then who actually go to Savile Row and buy themselves suits. But what can happen is one buys into a stereotype of what it is to be of the majority, in that case, to be English. The problem with this is as follows. One then takes on an echo position, a position of echo of that majority, where the idea of what that majority is all about is not fully formed, and at best becomes a stereotype of what's really actually there. It's hugely important to realize that. And also, in holding that echo position, as already stated, one has to suppress aspects of oneself that have been sitting within us for several generations. Now, that's hugely psychologically damaging to oneself, like a form of self-othering, if I use that phrase here. Now, I'm going to pause at this point, because I think it's important for us to spend a bit more time on just the impact of being an echo and what that means for the other. So I think it's very important to recognize where being an echo can actually create other others and how that forms and what the purpose of that is, and how actually being an echo in oneself can be detrimental on a psychological level. So I'm going to leave that there for today. Again, it's always a pleasure to talk to yourselves on YouTube. Keep in touch, keep sending me the messages, always a pleasure. I look forward to hearing from you. Please subscribe. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.